I always thought betrayal would announce itself loudly, a caught scent of unfamiliar cologne on a shirt, a lipstick stain, a late-night phone call with muffled whispers. In reality, it crept in quietly. The night I discovered my wife Jessica's affair, I was unloading the dishwasher while she showered. Her phone buzzed on the counter with a text preview lighting up the screen. "Can't wait for this weekend. Love you. M." My hand froze on a dripping plate. In that instant, the comfortable rhythm of our 12-year marriage shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. My heart pounded in my ears as I stared at the message. M was Mark, her boss, a man I'd met at a company holiday party once. I recalled their easy banter that night. I'd thought nothing of it then. Heat flushed through my body. Anger, humiliation, disbelief all at once. A dozen minor oddities over the past months snapped into focus. Jessica working late far more often. Her new obsession with her appearance. Guarded smiles at texts she never shared with me. Here was the confirmation, in plain, glowing pixels. I wanted to burst into the bathroom and demand answers, scream every hurtful thing building in my throat. My fist clenched around the plate, and for a moment I imagined hurling it against the wall in rage. But I didn't. Instead, I quietly set it back and took a slow breath. This single text was enough to upend my world, but not enough to act on, not yet. If I exploded now, I'd get lies, excuses, or worst, an apology I wasn't ready to hear. I needed proof, a full picture of what I was dealing with. So I did something that felt at odds with every instinct screaming inside me. I put her phone back down, exactly as it was, and left the kitchen. My hands trembled as I walked away, my mind racing ahead. If I confronted her cold, I might end up with nothing but denial. If I planned this right, I could turn her betrayal into leverage. Upstairs, I closed myself in our bedroom. No, my bedroom now, and sat on the edge of the bed. The bedsheets still smelled of her shampoo. In the distance, I heard the shower turn off. I had only minutes to compose myself. I gripped the mattress until my knuckles went white and forced slow breaths. Not yet. Don't let on. I repeated that to myself, swallowing the bitter mix of hurt and fury. By the time Jessica emerged, toweling her hair, I had buried the shock beneath a facade of normalcy. That night, I barely slept. I lay beside her in the dark, listening to her soft, steady breathing. My mind looped through questions with no good answers. How long has this been going on? Why would she do this? Is it me? What about our kids? My 10-year-old son and 7-year-old daughter slept down the hall, blissfully unaware that an earthquake was about to split their safe world apart. I felt a tear slip down my face into the pillow, and I clenched my jaw. I had to be strong, for them and for myself. Whatever happened next, I couldn't let anger alone guide me. I needed a plan, a careful strategy to navigate the emotional landmine that my life had become. By dawn, I had resolved to play it smart. Jessica had betrayed me at the deepest level, but I wasn't going to be her fool. If she was playing me behind my back, I would turn the tables. I'd gather evidence, line up my pieces on the board, and when the time was right, I would strike with precision. This wouldn't just be a confrontation, it would be a checkmate. The days that followed were an exercise in controlled fury. Each morning I woke and reminded myself, stay calm, observe, prepare. I began quietly collecting every shred of evidence of the affair while keeping Jessica unaware that anything had changed. First, I needed more than a text message. That weekend mentioned in Mark's text was only 2 days away. Jessica had indeed told me she'd be out of town on a work retreat from Friday to Sunday. I pretended to accept that without question, even offering to help pack her suitcase. Inside, my stomach churned at the thought of what retreat really meant. But I saw an opportunity. On Friday afternoon, I arranged for our kids to stay at my sister's house overnight. I told Jessica I'd let them have a fun sleepover with their cousins while she was working. She gave a distracted smile and a quick peck on my cheek before rushing out the door with her overnight bag. My jaw tightened at how easily she lied. As soon as she drove off, I followed. I had tucked a small GPS tracker into the spare tire well of her SUV the night before. It was a cheap device I'd purchased online in a moment of desperate planning. Now, watching the blinking dot on a phone app as I trailed a few miles behind her on the highway, I felt both sick and strangely focused. The tracker led me 2 towns over, to a quaint bed and breakfast by a lakeside. I parked a block away and watched from behind a row of trees as my wife, stepped out of her car. Mark emerged from another vehicle moments later. He greeted her with a warm, familiar hug and a quick kiss on her lips as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My chest constricted. Seeing it with my own eyes was far worse than any text on a screen. It took every ounce of willpower not to charge across the parking lot. Instead, I raised the camera I'd brought and snapped photos. The embrace. Their fingers intertwined as they walked into the B&B, the way she looked at him. Once upon a time, she'd looked at me that way. I realized my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I forced myself to steady them enough to get clear shots. Proof. I didn't linger long. I didn't need to torture myself by imagining what would happen inside that cozy inn. I had what I came for. I drove away, pulled into an empty gas station lot, and finally allowed myself to react. I slammed my palms against the steering wheel repeatedly, a silent howl of anguish contorting my face. How could she? The image of their kiss replayed in my mind until I thought I'd go mad. In that car, alone, I let the tears flow freely for a few minutes. Grief, rage, humiliation. I let each crash over me like waves, and then, gradually, the storm subsided and cold clarity set in. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at the photos on the camera's viewfinder. This was my evidence. This was my ticket to winning the war that was coming. Over the next week, I gathered more ammunition. One evening, while Jessica was bathing the kids, I slipped into our home office and opened her laptop. My heart was hammering. I half expected her to walk in, but I'd become accustomed to moving quietly under her nose. She had saved her email password in the browser. I felt a pang of something, guilt, shame at snooping, as I clicked into her inbox, but it was quickly erased by what I found. Dozens of emails between her and Mark, some mundane, scheduling meetings that I now knew were rendezvous, and others deeply intimate. My hands shook as I scrolled through words of endearment, even explicit exchanges that made my stomach turn. It took all my strength not to vomit right there. I forwarded the entire email chain to a new secret account I'd created for myself, then quietly erased the evidence of my login. Late that night, after Jessica was asleep, I read through the forwarded emails on my phone in the living room. It hurt, but I kept reading, because knowledge was power. I learned the affair had been going on for at least 6 months. They met during or after work, and occasionally on weekends under the guise of overtime or business trips. Mark promised her that he was planning to leave his own wife when the time was right. That line made me snort in disgust. It was a classic cheat's promise. Jessica, for her part, expressed guilt about deceiving me but wrote that she had never felt so alive. Those words pierced me. Our life, raising 2 kids, sharing a home, our inside jokes and daily routines, apparently didn't make her feel alive. But sneaking around did. Beneath the hurt, another realization dawned. If Mark was dangling promises of leaving his wife, that meant his own marriage was in play too. I wondered if his wife, Lauren, had any idea. She'd been gracious the one time I met her at a company event, completely unaware her husband was eyeing my wife. My mind started connecting dots. If I could quietly let Lauren know what was happening, I might gain an ally. It was risky. Things could blow up unpredictably, but two betrayed spouses working together might accomplish more than one. The next day, I decided to seek professional help. Not a therapist, though perhaps I'd need one eventually, but a lawyer. I found a highly recommended family law attorney in town, someone known for representing fathers in tough custody cases. Custody. The thought hadn't crystallized until that moment, but suddenly it was front and center. If this affair blew open, divorce was inevitable, and there were no circumstances under which I'd allow Jessica and her adulterous partner to take my children from me or become their primary caregivers. She had made her choices with complete disregard for our family. I would do everything in my power to make sure our kids stayed with me, where they'd be safe from the fallout of her selfishness. 2 days later, I sat in the polished office of Martin Hale, attorney at law. Hale was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with a calm, analytical demeanor. I felt a little self-conscious walking in with my folder of printed emails and photos like some amateur detective. But he listened without judgment as I haltingly explained the situation. I laid out the evidence on his desk. He examined a photo of Jessica and Mark holding hands by the lake, then skimmed an email where they discussed our kids. I feel so bad lying to Mike. I told him you were just mentoring me at work. The kids really like you, though. I was glad you met them at the picnic, even if Mike was around. That particular discovery had made my blood boil. She had introduced our children to Mark during a company picnic, casually, as Mommy's boss, while I stood there none the wiser. Brazen. Mr. Hale sighed and slid the papers back into the folder. "I'm sorry you're going through this," he said matter-of-factly. "Infidelity is a painful betrayal. Now, as your attorney, I need to strategize how this plays into a divorce and custody case." He steepled his fingers as he continued. "Let's start with divorce. Are you looking to file on grounds of adultery? Some states, like ours, allow fault-based divorce citing adultery. But keep in mind, it often doesn't affect the division of assets dramatically if the state is no fault by default. However, evidence of an affair can sometimes influence alimony if we prove marital funds were used on the affair. Do you suspect that?" I thought of the suspicious credit card charges I'd seen on our statements, hotel bookings, dinners at upscale restaurants we'd never gone to together. I nodded. Yes, there are transactions that don't make sense, likely spent on their activities. I can get statements. My voice was steadier than I expected. "Good. That could be useful leverage," Hale replied. "Now custody." He looked me straight in the eyes. "You mentioned you want to ensure your children stay with you. Are you aiming for sole custody?" "Yes." The answer came out faster and more forcefully than I intended. I took a breath. "I mean, ideally, yes. I'm the one who's been there for them consistently. I don't trust her judgment anymore. If she's prioritizing an affair over our family, I worry about what environment they'd be in under her care, especially if she ends up with this man." My voice trembled with anger. He gave a slight nod. "I understand, but I have to be frank. Family courts generally prioritize the best interests of the child. An affair, while morally egregious, doesn't automatically make a parent unfit. Unless the affair somehow endangers or negatively impacts the children, a judge might still lean towards joint custody or primary custody with the mother if she's been the primary caregiver. I opened my mouth to protest, but he raised a hand gently. I'm on your side, Mike. I just want you to know what we're up against. If Jessica has been an active, caring mother, the court won't punish her for adultery alone. We'll need to show evidence that the children are better off primarily with you. That could include demonstrating her affair led to neglect of the kids, or that her lover is a detrimental influence. I thought about that. Instances of neglect. There were times she claimed to be working late, and I'd have to pick up the kids from their after-school activities last minute. She'd missed our daughter's parent-teacher conference because of a meeting. Minor things individually, but a pattern that I could document. I resolved to compile a timeline of those events. As for the lover, Hale continued, almost spitting the word, do we know anything about him that could raise red flags? You said he's her boss, and he's married. Any hint of substance abuse, criminal record, anything? If he's going to be around your kids, we need to consider that. I shrugged, frustration simmering. I don't know yet. Aside from being a cheating snake, I don't know much about his personal life. But I can find out. If there was dirt on Mark, I would unearth it. All right. Also consider, if your wife intends to be with this man long-term, she might plan to introduce the kids into that life. Some judges frown on introducing a new partner too quickly, especially one involved in the breakup. We could push for a clause restricting that, at least temporarily, and if she violates it, that can bolster your case. I nodded, already thinking of how to ensure such a clause. Thank you. I'll gather whatever I can. What's our next step? Hale gave a thin smile. Next, we quietly file for divorce when you're ready, serving her at a time that gives you an advantage, perhaps when the children are with you, to avoid any sudden custody grabs. His tone turned serious. Be prepared. When she's served, things might get volatile. Sometimes the cheating spouse, out of guilt or fear, will agree to terms. Other times they become defensive or vengeful. We have to be ready for either. As I left his office, I felt a mix of resolve and anxious energy. The legal roadmap was daunting, but at least I had one. This was no longer just an emotional nightmare. It was a battle I intended to win. That evening, I took another strategic step, contacting Mark's wife, Lauren. It took a bit of sleuthing. Lauren wasn't on social media much, but I knew their last name and found an address through online records, public voter registration data, ironically. I debated how best to approach her. A phone call out of the blue felt too abrupt. Instead, I wrote a short, careful email from my secret account. I introduced myself as Jessica's husband, apologizing for the shock this message would bring, and gently informed her that I had evidence her husband was having an affair with my wife. I offered to share what I had, suggesting we meet in person at a location of her choosing. I reread the email 4 times, ensuring the tone was sympathetic and factual, then hit send with a shaky finger. She replied within hours. Her message was short, but hit with palpable emotion. She had suspected something was off with Mark, but had no proof, until now. She agreed to meet me the next day at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, early afternoon when she could slip away. I arrived first, nervous. This was an incredibly delicate meeting. I didn't know Lauren beyond that one social event, and now I was about to detonate her life with the truth I provided. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. She looked almost the same as I remembered, poised, smartly dressed, but with worry lines around her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. I stood and gave a slight, awkward wave. Lauren, hi. Thank you for coming, I greeted softly. Mike, she replied, forcing a polite half-smile as she sat across from me. For a moment, we just looked at each other, two strangers bound by a terrible common thread. I cleared my throat. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this. Her jaw tightened. Just please tell me what you know, she said quietly, bracing herself with a hand around her coffee cup. I told her everything, keeping my voice low. As I described the text, the photos, the emails, I saw her eyes glisten. She blinked rapidly, holding herself together. But I knew the pain behind those eyes because I wore the same look every morning in the mirror. I slid over copies of a few key photos and emails, letting her read proof of what her gut may have already known. For a while, she was silent, staring at a photo of Mark and Jessica by the lake. Finally, she spoke, voice trembling. Thank you for telling me, as awful as this is. Thank you for being honest. I have 2 kids with him, she added, almost to herself. Our daughter is 8. Our son is 5. I can't. She trailed off, wiping a tear. My heart sank further. Mark's children were so young. They didn't deserve this upheaval any more than mine did. I'm sorry, I said again. I know the feeling. We have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. They adore their mother. I don't know how to... I couldn't finish. It was one of the first times I'd voiced that fear aloud. How to eventually tell the kids, or whether to tell them the full truth at all. Lauren looked up, eyes red but gaze firm now. They'll find out one day who their parents really are. What matters now is protecting them. So what do we do, Mike? Why did you reach out? Do you have a plan? I exhaled, relieved that she was shifting to the practical on. I do. Well, parts of one. I've hired a lawyer and I'm preparing to file for divorce. My priority is getting custody of my kids, and I wanted to know if you were planning the same or if we could possibly coordinate. She gave a bitter little laugh. Coordinate? Like joint tactical strikes? Something like that, I nodded. Mark and Jessica have coordinated their betrayal. It might be fitting if we coordinated our response. A steely resolve hardened within me as I spoke. For instance, I don't intend to reveal to Jessica that you know. If she thinks her secret is safe with you in the dark, she'll be less guarded. Meanwhile, if you're gathering evidence or preparing legal action, I can keep you informed of anything I learn about Mark's moves, and vice versa. Lauren thought for a moment. Tit for tat. They won't see it coming. He always underestimates me, she murmured. Then she straightened. I haven't hired a lawyer yet, but I will. I suspected an affair but didn't have proof. Now I have more than enough to sue for divorce on grounds of adultery. We exchanged contact information and agreed to keep each other in the loop. Before parting, we made one more pact. We would hold back on any confrontations or exposures until the time was right for maximum effect. She confessed that a part of her wanted to burst in on them screaming, but we both knew that a carefully executed plan would hurt them far more than a moment of cathartic rage. Walking out of the cafe, I felt an unexpected kinship with Lauren. It was a strange comfort to not be alone in this, though I wished neither of us were in this club of the betrayed. She was as determined as I was to make them face consequences. That night, I went home to a house that felt increasingly alien. Jessica was in the living room helping our son Tommy with a science project. I paused in the hallway observing them. She looked so normal, pointing and laughing as our son constructed a paper solar system, as though she hadn't blown up our universe in secret. It struck me how convincing her double life was, and it stoked my resolve even hotter. I spent the rest of the evening quietly scanning bank statements and credit card bills, highlighting charges that corresponded with dates and places I now knew she'd been with Mark. Dinner, meanwhile, was perfunctory. I made spaghetti for the family, and around the table, Jessica made casual conversation about her day, asking the kids about school. I offered polite, brief responses about my own day at work. It all felt like theater, everyone playing their expected role, but I could sense her occasionally glancing at me, trying to gauge if something was off. I realized I must seem distant. I tried to mask it by forcing a smile at something our daughter said about her art class. That night in bed, Jessica turned to me in the dark. "Are you feeling all right, Mike? You've been quiet lately." Her voice had a softness that might have once made me melt. I stiffened, my back to her. "Just tired. Work's been stressful," I lied evenly. My heart thudded, wondering if she detected the falseness. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry. Anything I can do?" The concern in her tone sounded genuine. It almost angered me more. How dare she act concerned for me, share my bed, after spending weekends with another man? I shuffled slightly out from under her hand. "No, I'm okay. Thanks." A heavy silence hung. She didn't push further, and after a minute I heard her sigh and roll back to her side. In the dim light, I stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched. Lying here with her felt wrong, but I endured it for now. Soon enough, there would be an empty space in this bed, one way or another. Acting normal in the face of deceit is a peculiar kind of torture. Each day that I maintained the facade, I felt a piece of me fray at the edges. But I played my part, because tipping my hand too early could cost me everything. In the mornings, I still greeted Jessica with a brief kiss on the cheek, tasting the irony of it. We still coordinated school drop-offs and grocery lists. I even forced myself to ask how her work was going, to which she'd respond with bland details about project deadlines or client meetings. Lies, all of it. But I nodded as if everything were fine. Meanwhile, I subtly positioned myself to be the model dad. I volunteered to coach my son's Little League practices on Saturdays. I started packing the kids' lunches, writing little notes to tuck in, something Jessica usually did. If she noticed my sudden overparenting, she didn't mention it explicitly, though once she did say with a curious smile, "You've been so thoughtful with the kids lately. I really appreciate it." I just shrugged, offering a half smile. I know I've been busy with work in the past. Figured I should step up more. That at least was partly true. I was busy before, maybe too busy to notice my wife slipping away. The irony now was that I balanced all this extra family involvement while secretly orchestrating a divorce war. Still, her comment gave me pause. Was she feeling a pang of guilt as I showed up more for the kids? Maybe. But if so, she didn't confess anything. She let me carry more of the load at home, likely relieved I wasn't questioning her frequent absences. In a twisted way, my heightened helpfulness probably made her affair easier to conduct. I was effectively covering for her negligence. So be it. Every story time I did, every dentist appointment I took them to instead of her, all that would strengthen my case that I was the stable parent holding things together. There were moments my mask nearly slipped. One Sunday afternoon, Jessica was in the backyard FaceTiming Mark. I knew because I caught a glimpse of the call log later, but at the time she told me she was going outside to call her mother. Through the kitchen window, I saw her pacing with an animated smile, the way she hadn't smiled at me in ages. It made my blood boil. When she came back in, still flush from the conversation, she found me furiously scrubbing an already clean counter. She laughed lightly. "The kitchen's going to sparkle if you keep that up." I forced myself to stop, realizing I'd been scouring the same spot for who knows how long. My hands were trembling with pent-up anger. I muttered something like, "just trying to keep things tidy," and busied myself with rinsing the rag so she wouldn't see my face contorted in what I knew was barely concealed rage. Another close call came one evening after the kids were in bed. Jessica was curled up on the couch watching a TV show. I was ostensibly reading emails on my phone across the room, but truthfully, I was reviewing the divorce filing documents Mr. Hale had prepared. The plan was to serve her in a week's time, after I had finalized a few more details. My stomach was in knots at the thought of it, but also eager for this charade to end. Suddenly, Jessica spoke, breaking my concentration. "Honey, look at this," she said, laughing at something on the TV. Absent-mindedly and out of long habit, I walked over and sat beside her. Without thinking, I put my arm around her shoulders, as I had 1,000 times. On the screen, a sitcom character was doing something ridiculous. Jessica leaned into me, chuckling, her head against my chest. I stiffened, reality crashing back. Here she was, cuddling up to me as if everything were normal, as if she weren't betraying me at every turn. For a split second, an urge to shove her away coursed through me, accompanied by an image of her shocked face if I blurted, "Get off me, you lying cheat." I took a silent, deep breath and patted her arm instead, carefully peeling myself away under the pretense of getting a drink from the kitchen. I retreated there, gripping the edge of the sink until the wave of resentment passed. This was nearly over, I reminded myself. Just a few more days of pretending. During this time, I also subtly began moving certain assets and documents. I opened a separate bank account in my name only and started diverting a portion of my paycheck there, in case of nasty financial fights later. I scanned copies of our marriage certificate, the kids' birth certificates, the title to the house, anything I might need for legal proceedings, and stored them on a secure drive. I even stashed some cash in a safe deposit box, anticipating that once the storm hit, access to joint funds could become a weapon for either side. Through all this, I kept in touch with Lauren. We spoke on the phone a couple of times from my office at work, since I didn't dare call from home. She had confronted Mark indirectly by asking pointed questions, but he had brushed her off with some lies that he was mentoring a struggling employee. She didn't let on that she knew the truth. Instead, she played the dutiful but suspicious wife, quietly gathering her own evidence. She managed to confirm a weekend when Mark claimed to be on a business trip, but actually checked into that same lakeside B&B with Jessica. I had provided her the dates I knew. Lauren even visited the inn under a pretext and sweet-talked a desk clerk into confirming that her husband had stayed there with another woman. It gave her enough for her lawyer to begin drafting her own divorce complaint. We agreed on one critical element: timing. I wanted to serve Jessica with divorce papers before Lauren served Mark. The rationale was that if Mark got wind of my divorce filing first, through Jessica panicking and telling him, it might complicate Lauren's confrontation and vice versa. So we synchronized. I would serve Jessica on a Wednesday morning, an ambush when the kids were safely at school. Lauren planned to have Mark served the very next day at his office, a 1-2 punch they wouldn't see coming. As that fateful Wednesday approached, my nerves were on edge. Some nights I barely slept. I'd lie in bed next to Jessica, listening to the rhythmic sound of her breathing, and think about the vows we exchanged years ago, for better or for worse, forsaking all others. The memory of our wedding day would flood in unbidden, her radiant smile, the way she squeezed my hand when she said, "I do," It felt like a lifetime ago, a naive era. I often wondered, did she ever truly love me during these past months? Or had every kiss, every laugh been a lie? In those dark hours, doubt gnawed at me. Despite everything, a part of me was still heartbroken. Under the anger was a deep well of sadness. I was mourning the loss of the woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had. And I was terrified of how this would scar our children. Some nights I even crept into their rooms, just to watch them sleep peacefully, and silently promised them I would make this right. They deserved at least one parent they could rely on. The morning of the planned confrontation, I could hardly eat. My hands shook as I poured coffee. Jessica noticed. "You sure you're okay, Mike? You look pale," she said, buttering toast for our daughter. I flashed what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well," I said truthfully. "Probably that project deadline on my mind." I sipped the coffee mainly to hide behind the mug. She touched my arm with concern, and I almost recoiled on reflex. "Maybe tonight we can relax, watch a movie or something. You need a break," she offered kindly. I stared at her, baffled by the dissonance. She was playing the caring wife so convincingly, maybe even genuinely in that moment. How could she compartmentalize so well? I had no words, afraid my voice would betray my turmoil. I just nodded and mumbled, "Maybe, yeah." As she turned away to pack the kids' backpacks, I allowed myself one unguarded look at her. She was beautiful, the same brown hair and green eyes that I fell in love with, moving around the kitchen in her robe, humming softly as she zipped a lunchbox. For an instant, I felt a gut-wrenching longing for the before, for the reality where this morning routine wasn't a lie. But that reality was gone. She had destroyed it. I left for work as usual, but only half worked through the morning. My mind was on the plan. I had arranged to take an early lunch break for the deed. The divorce papers were ready, neatly stacked in an envelope in my briefcase. The summons, the complaint citing adultery, proposed custody arrangements. I requested primary custody. And even a drafted temporary order to maintain status quo with the kids' residence, and a morality clause about not having unrelated overnight guests around the children. Mr. Hale had been thorough. At 11 a.m., I drove home, heart hammering in my chest. Jessica typically worked from home on Wednesdays, and I knew she'd be there alone. This was intentional. I wanted privacy and control when this conversation happened. The kids would be at school until afternoon. As I pulled into our driveway, I took a moment to steady myself. There is no good way to rip someone's world apart, even if they brought it upon themselves. Part of me dreaded seeing her face when she realized the jig was up, but another part, the wounded, angry part, hungered for it. I found Jessica in the living room, papers spread around her and her laptop open. She really was working, it seemed. She looked up in surprise when I walked in. "Mike, what are you doing home?" I stood there in my suit, briefcase in hand, trying to read her expression. Was that a flicker of guilt crossing her face or just confusion? My mouth felt dry as sand. This was it. "Can we talk?" I managed, my voice low and oddly calm in my ears. She frowned and closed her laptop. "You're scaring me. What's wrong?" She stood, taking a step toward me. I set my briefcase down and pulled out the envelope of papers, holding it at my side like a lead weight. My heart thumped wildly, but my words came out steady. "I know about you and Mark." It was as if all the color drained from the room. Jessica froze. For a moment, she was a perfect tableau of shock. Eyes wide, mouth parted but no sound, face turning pale. In that second of silence, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and my own heartbeat in my ears. Her voice came out a whisper. What? What are you talking about? A last-ditch denial, or perhaps genuine disbelief that I knew. I swallowed hard. I know you've been having an affair, I said, each word measured, with Mark from your office, your boss. Saying it aloud, even calmly, made my throat tighten. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, Mike! She didn't finish whatever thought she had. Tears instantly sprang to her eyes. Whether they were of guilt, fear, or sadness, I couldn't yet tell. I extended the envelope toward her like an offering. These are divorce papers. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. I'm filing for divorce on grounds of adultery. I want custody of the kids. At that, she seemed to truly process what was happening. Her eyes darted from the envelope to my face. Custody? Mike, wait! She reached out, but then pulled her hand back as if afraid to touch the envelope. Please, can we just talk about this? You weren't even going to ask me what happened or why. Her voice broke, a tear spilling down her cheek. A flush of anger surged in me. Ask you why? I echoed, incredulous. What possible explanation justifies what you did? I could hear my voice rising despite my attempt to stay composed. Our marriage, our family, everything. And you throw it away for him? She flinched, tears streaming now. It wasn't about throwing you or the kids away. I know it's hard to believe, but I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh, unable to contain it. You never wanted to hurt me? Jessica, you carried on an affair right under my nose for months. How did you think I'd feel when I found out? Did you think I'd never find out? My voice cracked at the end, revealing the raw hurt underneath. She sobbed openly now, covering her face with her hands. I don't know. I was selfish and stupid. It just happened. And then I felt trapped in it. I didn't know how to stop. Her words tumbled out in a panicked rush. Mike, I love you. I never stopped loving you. I'm so sorry. Hearing her say, I love you, at that moment almost made me physically ill. I closed my eyes, trying to maintain some control. My hands were shaking. Stop, I said hoarsely. Just stop. If you loved me, you wouldn't have slept with another man. Don't stand there and lie to my face that you love me while you've been with him. She stepped closer, daring to place a hand on my forearm, her touch light and trembling. Please listen. It started when her voice faltered and she swallowed. It started when I felt like we were drifting apart. You were always at work or busy, and I felt invisible. Mark noticed me, gave me attention. It was never about hurting you. I was unhappy, and I handled it in the worst way possible. Her words came out between sobs, but had a rehearsed ring, as if she'd thought through this explanation. I yanked my arm away from her touch, a flare of both pain and anger coursing through me. So it's my fault? I made you cheat because I worked too much? I snapped. No, not your fault, she said quickly. It's all on me. I should have talked to you or suggested counseling, or anything else. You didn't deserve this. The kids didn't deserve this. She was pleading now, desperate. You're damn right we didn't, I said, voice cold. Counseling, communication, those are things people who actually respect their spouse attempt. But you, I gestured at her, unable to find a word vile enough. You took the coward's way, the selfish way. She wiped her face with shaking fingers. I know, she whispered. I have no excuse. I was selfish, and I will regret this for the rest of my life, but Mike, please, don't do this so quickly. We can figure something out. Think about the kids. They need both of us. Now we were at the heart of it. I stiffened. You should have thought about the kids before having an affair with someone who is not their father. She broke into fresh sobs, but I pressed on, relentless. Do you think I want them around this? Around lies and deceit? What happens when they find out their mom cheated? Because eventually they will, Jessica. This doesn't stay secret forever. She shook her head, panic in her eyes. They don't have to find out. We can keep this between us. We could try to work through this quietly. I'll end it with Mark. I swear I'll do anything. Just please. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I was momentarily stunned by her plea to reconcile. A swell of conflicting emotions rose in me. There was a time I would have moved mountains to hear her say she'd do anything to fix our marriage. But that time was before the betrayal. Now her begging felt like too little, too late, a scramble born of fear of consequences. I eyed her bitterly. Is it because you're afraid of losing the kids, or because you truly regret choosing him over your family? If Mark had divorced his wife and given you a clear path, would you still be here begging me right now, or would you be with him? The question spilled out. Years of trust turned to poison. She looked as if I'd slapped her. I never planned to leave you for him. I was confused. I was wrong. He doesn't matter. He never mattered as much as you and the kids. It was a stupid fling that got out of hand. She was grasping at straws, saying whatever she thought might sway me. A fling. 6 months of lies reduced to a fling. I felt a flare of hot rage. Don't downplay it, I snarled. Meeting him every week, taking him to our kids' picnic, spending family savings on your little getaways. None of that is a fling, Jessica. That's a full-blown double life. One you chose every day when you kept lying. Her shoulders shook as she wept. You have every right to be angry, I know. And I know I might not deserve it. But I'm asking for another chance, for the sake of our family. A heavy silence followed. I realized I'd been clenching the divorce papers in my hand so tightly that the edges crumpled. My plan had been to calmly hand them to her and leave, but emotions were high and messy now. I tried to regain a semblance of composure. I couldn't let her see any softening in me, not now. I took a deep breath. Jessica, I came here to tell you that I'm done. I have an attorney. This, I held up the envelope, is happening. It's not a negotiation. It's notice. I will be filing these papers today. You will get served officially, likely tomorrow. I wanted to give you the courtesy of hearing it from me first. She stared at the envelope in my hand, and finally took it. As she pulled out the documents and saw the bold legal lettering, her face crumpled. This is really happening, she whispered, almost to herself. Then her eyes flitted over the custody section, and a flash of something new came into her tear-streaked face. Defiance. Full custody to you? Primary residence with the father? She looked up, voice hitching but with an edge. No, Mike, I'm their mother. I've been there every day of their lives. You can't seriously think I'd just let you take them from me. Now we were adversaries. I felt it shift. The remorse in her gaze didn't disappear entirely, but it was now mixed with fear and rising anger. She was realizing the ramifications, that I was prepared to take not just myself away from her, but the children too. I don't want to take them from you, I said evenly. I want to ensure they have stability. You can be in their lives, but I intend to be their primary parent. It's right there in black and white. She scanned the papers frantically. Alternate weekends. Split holidays. Mike, this is so cold. Fresh tears welled, but behind them I sensed steel. You can't cut me out like this. I won't let you. I crossed my arms, bracing myself. It's up to the court ultimately, but given the circumstances, I believe it's justified, and I'll fight for it. She shook her head vigorously. No judge will give you full custody just because I messed up our marriage. I am a good mother. I have never hurt or neglected our children. She was speaking more to herself, rallying, but her words hit me. She wasn't entirely wrong. Her affair aside, she had been a loving mother in many ways. This would be the crux of our battle. You put them in harm's way by involving them in your affair, I retorted. Bringing them around Mark, lying to them about who he was. Do you know how confused and betrayed they'll feel when they learn the truth? You made our whole family life a lie. That is harm, Jessica, emotional harm, and I will make sure the court understands that. I sounded confident, though inwardly I knew it was a gray area legally, but I had to throw what I could at her. She pressed her palms to her temples, visibly trying to think. Then she surprised me. We can do therapy. We can work on this, for them. Please don't rush to tear everything apart. Even now, she was scrambling for a way to undo this. Perhaps seeing the official papers snapped her into the reality of losing her family. A tiny part of me almost admired that she was willing to fight to keep the kids, if not me. But I hardened myself. I reminded myself of the nights she left our children with a babysitter to go sleep with Mark, of the school recitals she missed while sending flirty texts to him. Good mother or not, she prioritized her affair for months, and I wasn't about to let that slide. I'm not interested in therapy, I said quietly, and I think it's too late for the suck of the children plea. The best thing for them is to not be caught in a toxic household or a tug of war. That means figuring out custody properly. I motioned to the documents in her hand. I'm open to a reasonable visitation arrangement for you, but I won't budge on being the custodial parent. Jessica's expression hardened at my intransigence. Her tears still fell, but there was a spark of anger now. You've already decided everything, haven't you? She said bitterly. You planned all this without even talking to me. You're just executing me, sentencing me to losing half my life, my kids, without a chance. I felt a flicker of guilt then. This was the mother of my children, now looking at me like I was the villain. But I couldn't relent. I didn't make these choices lightly, I replied. I've been talking to you in my head for weeks, Jessica. Every night I wanted to scream at you, but I held it in so that I could handle this the right way. You put me in this position. You're the one who destroyed the chance to discuss things calmly when you snuck around with another man. She opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment, our doorbell rang sharply. Both of us startled. I glanced at the clock. Noon. Right on schedule, I realized. I had asked a process server to officially serve the papers at midday, in case I lost my nerve to hand them to her myself. Jessica looked between me and the door, confusion on her face. I stepped back. That'll be the formal service, I said quietly. She frowned, eyes puffy and red. Service? What do you... Then it clicked. You mean someone's here to give me these... officially? I nodded, feeling a bit ashamed at the cold precision of it. But it was necessary. You have to be legally served. I arranged it. She let out a small, incredulous laugh, tinged with bitterness. You really have it all planned out. God, who are you right now? I almost don't recognize you. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Was I being overly cruel, orchestrating it like this? Should I have given her a day to process before the server came? But the doorbell rang again, insistent. The time for second guessing was over. "I'll get it," I said, moving to the door. Jessica followed a few paces behind, hugging her arms around herself. I opened the door to find a professionally dressed woman holding an envelope. "Michael K?" she asked. I affirmed. She then looked past me. "Is Mrs. K home?" I stepped slightly aside, revealing Jessica behind me. The server handed the envelope toward her. "Ma'am, you've been served," she said briskly as Jessica numbly took it. The server left with efficient haste. Jessica held the envelope, which contained the same documents now with court stamps, and stared at my name on the petitioner line, her name as respondent. I could see her eyes moving over it, absorbing the finality. She looked up at me, standing in the open doorway. I'll never forget that look. Grief-stricken, furious, terrified all at once. "This is really how you want to do it," she said softly. "Like a business transaction." I met her gaze steadily, though it hurt to breathe. "I'm doing what I have to do." The fight went out of her then, at least for now. Shoulders slumped. She stepped aside. I need to be alone," she choked out, and retreated upstairs, clutching both copies of the papers. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My legs felt unsteady. That was, without question, the hardest conversation of my life up to that point. And it was only the opening salvo. I glanced around our living room, the family photos on the wall, the kids' artwork on the fridge visible from where I stood. The home we built together now sat under a pall of impending fracture. But oddly, I felt a grim calm through the adrenaline. I had executed step one of my plan. Now the war truly began. In the days following the serving of the papers, things moved quickly. Jessica moved out of our bedroom and into the guest room immediately. I think neither of us could tolerate sleeping in the same bed after that confrontation. At first, she stayed in the house, likely to maintain proximity to the kids, and to not appear as if she were abandoning them. A smart move from her side, legally. We navigated a tense, awkward cohabitation. Communication was minimal and formal. She told the kids that she and Daddy were having some grown-up problems, and for now she'd sleep in the spare room. The kids were confused, but we both tried to keep their routines stable. Meanwhile, her own attorney filed a response to my divorce complaint within a week. She did not deny the adultery, interestingly. Instead, her lawyer focused on disputing my custody demands. They proposed joint legal custody and a shared physical custody schedule, basically 50-50ths time. Reading her filing, which painted her as a devoted mother and me as a typically busy father, made me furious. It twisted some facts, like implying I worked long hours and was often absent from daily child-rearing responsibilities, which had a grain of truth historically, but glossed over how much I'd been doing recently. It mentioned nothing of her affair's impact on the kids, of course. Mr. Hale assured me this was standard posturing. "They're staking out their position. Don't let it rattle you," he advised. Easy for him to say. It wasn't his life on those pages, but I swallowed my anger and prepared our counter-strategy. One of the first battles in custody came swiftly: the temporary custody and separation arrangements. A family court hearing was scheduled to establish how we'd handle things until the divorce was finalized, which could be many months away. Typically, courts like to maintain stability for the kids and often lean toward joint arrangements in the interim, unless there's cause otherwise. I knew this, and so did my attorney, but we aimed to tilt the scales. In my affidavit for the hearing, I included a log I had painstakingly compiled of instances where Jessica's affair interfered with her parenting. It listed dates and events. May 14th. Mother missed parent-teacher conference. Claimed work. Later discovered she was with affair partner. June 9th. Mother returned home 3 hours late without notice. Children were waiting. She was with affair partner. And so on. For each, I had evidence or at least corroboration. Some from text messages or emails I found. Some from my own journal records. It painted a picture, perhaps a slightly dramatized one, of a mother frequently distracted and absent due to her affair. Jessica's side came armed with character references and statements. Neighbors and her sister attesting that she was a loving, present mother. One neighbor wrote that Jessica organized playdates and was often seen taking the kids to the park. True enough, she did those things. She too submitted a journal, likely at her lawyer's instruction, documenting her daily involvement in the kids' homework, meals, bedtimes. The day of the temporary orders hearing, we sat on opposite sides of a polished wood courtroom, not unlike strangers. We barely looked at each other. Mark was not there, nor would he be involved unless subpoenaed later. It was a short, somewhat informal proceeding in judges' chambers. The judge, a gray-haired woman with a no-nonsense air, spoke kindly to both of us about focusing on the children's needs. If only she knew the turmoil churning beneath our composed exteriors. My lawyer emphasized that I had been the primary caregiver recently, and that due to the marital misconduct of Jessica, the children had already suffered disruption. He carefully argued that I had stepped in to fill any gaps, and thus the kids' daily lives were currently more dependent on me. Jessica's lawyer insisted that my wife's personal mistakes did not equate to being a lesser parent, and that she'd always been there for the children emotionally and physically. It was a bit of a stalemate. The judge frowned over the mention of the affair, but as expected said something about, while unfortunate, the court's concern is the children's routine and well-being. Both parents appear involved. We usually prefer a temporary shared arrangement unless there's evidence a child was harmed or endangered, which I do not see here. I felt a knot in my stomach as she spoke those words. However, I did catch the judge giving a sharp look toward Jessica when my attorney pointed out that the children had been introduced to the affair partner under false pretenses. That did not sit well with her. "Mrs. K, is this true? That your children have spent time around the man involved in the infidelity without Mr. K's knowledge of who he was?" the judge asked. Jessica's voice was small but clear. "They met him once at a company picnic. He was my boss, so I introduced him as such, nothing more. They haven't been around him aside from that." I knew that last part was a lie. There was at least one other time Mark had come by when the kids were home, when I was away on a work trip, as I later pieced together. But I had no solid proof of that incident. Just a neighbor's offhand comment that some man was at the house one evening. We didn't raise it now due to lack of evidence. The judge pursed her lips. "I will just say this. During the temporary period, neither parent should have any new romantic partners present with the children. It's a standard request I make in contentious separations, to minimize confusion for the kids. I'll include that provision in my order." I felt a small victory there. That was essentially what we wanted, a temporary ban on Mark being near the kids. Jessica agreed to it with a quick nod, likely having no choice. In the end, the judge issued a temporary custody order that was essentially joint custody, but with a clear schedule. The kids would reside in the family home, our home, during the week with me, and spend every other weekend with Jessica at her sister's place, where she ended up staying after the blow-up. She would have one midweek dinner visit as well. It wasn't the full custody I wanted, but it was more structured than a pure 50-50ths and gave me the majority of school nights. I took that as a small win, given courts usually default to equal time. As we left that hearing, Jessica approached me in the hallway, away from our lawyers. She looked tired, drawn. "I guess this is how it's going to be for now," she said softly, referring to the arrangement. "For now," I replied. We both knew the real fight would be the final custody decision in the divorce, months down the road or via settlement. She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you hate me, Mike?" It caught me off guard. A genuine question, naked of the legal posturing. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for years, the mother of my children, now essentially my legal opponent. Did I hate her? I certainly hated what she'd done. I hated the position we were in. But did I truly hate her? I realized I didn't have an answer, not a simple yes or no. "I'm angry," I finally said, "and hurt. That's all I can say." Her eyes glistened as if hoping for more, but I had nothing else to give. Our lawyers rejoined us, and we parted ways. She went to find her car, and I walked with Hale to debrief. That evening, I had to explain to the kids that Mommy would be living at Auntie's house some days, and they'd see her on certain days. We framed it as a temporary arrangement while Mom and Dad work through some things. It was one of the most difficult conversations I've had. Our son Tommy got quiet and asked if it was his fault, which broke my heart. We reassured him fervently that it wasn't. Our daughter clung to Jessica when she came to pick them up for the first scheduled weekend, crying that she wanted Mommy to stay home. I had to step into another room so as not to lose my composure at that moment. Hearing my daughter wail, "Mommy, please don't go," nearly shattered me. Jessica was crying too as she carried our little girl to the car. It took all my willpower not to rush out and call the whole thing off right then. The kid's pain was a knife in my gut. But I reminded myself that a short-term confusion was better than a long-term toxic environment. Better they see some strife now than be raised in a lie or a loveless marriage, I told myself. Still, it felt like cruelty. As the weeks went on, our divorce case ramped up. We entered mediation for the divorce terms, which included custody, property division, and other issues. Each session felt like a psychological chess match, with lawyers playing proxy for some parts, but often with both of us in the same room, trying to negotiate through clenched teeth and wounded hearts. One particularly heated mediation session revolved around the house. Our home, where I still lived with the kids, was the biggest asset. Jessica initially said she wanted it sold and equity split, likely aiming to have money for a fresh start. I refused. I wanted to keep the house for the kids' stability. "They've been through enough. Uprooting them from their home on top of everything is cruel," I argued. She shot back, "I can't afford to just give it to you and start from zero. I need my share to have a place of my own suitable for the kids." That stung because she had a point. If I got the house, she'd have to find a decent home to live in on her custody days, and houses in our school district weren't cheap. After some back and forth, I saw an opening aligned with my ultimate goal: feigned concession. I offered this. I would buy out her half of the house's equity by giving her a larger portion of our savings and retirement accounts. Plus, I'd assume a jointly held car loan. Essentially, she'd get more cash now, but I'd keep the house. To sweeten it, I also, at least on paper, offered not to seek any child support from her, despite me having majority time. My attorney had advised this as a strategic move. By giving her what looked like a financial win, we might secure what I really wanted: custody and the house. We knew Jessica was concerned about money, especially since Mark's situation was shaky. More on that soon. She might jump at a deal that gave her financial relief and pride of not paying support. in exchange for conceding more time to me with the kids. It was a calculated risk. Child support could have been significant, but collecting it was less important to me than having my kids safe and primarily with me. Also, by not having her pay, I could later, if needed, say I was providing for them single-handedly, a subtle point in my favor. As expected, the money spoke to her. After considering, she agreed in principle to that arrangement. It wasn't final until everything was signed, but it was a tentative breakthrough. I'd keep the house, I'd waive child support. In return, I'd have the kids more of the time. Though she still wanted to label it joint custody legally, she was amenable to something like a 70/30th split in practice. That was still more than I ideally wanted her to have, but far less than 50/50ths. I weighed the options. Should I push for even less? Hale cautioned me privately that pushing a mother down to something like every other weekend only, without a compelling reason, might not fly if it went before a judge. The fact she was willing to accept me as primary without the fight going nuclear was a positive sign. Perhaps it was because she felt guilty, or perhaps because Mark wasn't going to be a caregiver type, I wasn't sure. But I suspected the latter. Word had it Mark wasn't thrilled at the idea of taking on someone else's kids full-time, and Jessica knew it. Speaking of Mark, his life was unraveling in parallel. True to plan, the day after I served Jessica, Lauren had served Mark with her own divorce papers at his office, in front of his colleagues no less. I learned from her that he was furious and embarrassed. He'd apparently tried to call Jessica immediately that day, but Jessica, dealing with our immediate crisis, didn't pick up. Their relationship was under serious strain now that it was out in the open. This showed in Jessica's demeanor too. At one mediation, I remember she looked disheveled and exhausted. I overheard a snippet of a conversation between her and her lawyer during a break, something about him living in some hotel now, and not sure what I'm doing with him. A pang of grim satisfaction hit me. Their perfect fantasy was crumbling under reality. But I also gleaned something useful. Mark had been put on leave at work. The HR department at their company apparently found out about the affair, probably through gossip after the dramatic serving, or perhaps Lauren had informed them. I wouldn't put it past her. Office affairs violated a policy, especially since he was her superior. There was talk he might even lose his job. Jessica hadn't been fired. Likely they wouldn't fire her for being subordinate in that situation. But she was moved to a different department under a different manager to separate them. The workplace humiliation angle was playing out without me even pushing it yet. I stored all that away. I was waiting for the right time to deliver the coup de grace, and that time was nearing. However, a twist came when a court-appointed guardian ad litem, Gael, was assigned to our case to represent the kids' best interests. Sometimes in contentious custody matters, this happens. The Gael would interview us, the kids, maybe teachers or doctors. I was nervous. This person's impression could sway the judge. If the gal thought the kids needed equal time with mom, that could derail my plans. I met with the gal, a soft-spoken middle-aged man, and laid out my perspective. I focused on the kids' routines, my involvement, and voiced concern about Jessica's judgment, referencing the affair indirectly. There was a breach of trust, and the children were exposed to a confusing situation with a third party. I tried not to sound vindictive, just worried for stability. The gal also met with Jessica. I don't know exactly what she said, but knowing her, she likely emphasized that she loved the kids dearly, that she regretted any pain caused, that she was stable now and the kids needed both parents. He interviewed the kids too, gently. I recall him telling me after talking to them separately that They seemed to be doing okay, considering. They miss having mom and dad together. Both of you clearly love them a lot. I wondered if he picked up on any subtle fear or preference from them. My son had voiced to me that he was angry at mom for going away at night, and he didn't like it when she wasn't home to tuck him in. I hoped he said something like that to the gal, but one can't coach kids on these things. It had to be natural. As this process dragged on, I occasionally found myself wavering emotionally. One night, after the kids had a tough day, our daughter had an outburst at school, likely due to home stress. I called Jessica to discuss it. It was a civil call, focused on our child. After the practical details, we lingered in silence on the phone for a moment. Then Jessica quietly said, "I'm sorry. For everything, Mike. I know I keep saying it, but I am. I wish I could take it back." Her voice sounded small and broken. I closed my eyes. Part of me ached hearing her like that. Despite all, there was a history between us, and hearing genuine remorse tugged at those old heartstrings. For a second, I imagined an alternate path. What if I had tried to forgive and reconcile? Would that have been better for the kids? Could I ever have lived with it? I shook off the thought. It felt too late, and the trust was gone. "I'm sorry too," I found myself saying, "that we're here, that the kids—" I didn't finish. She sniffled. "They'll heal. We have to make sure they do, even if we don't." It was a strange moment of almost bonding over our mutual love for the children, even as we were legally at each other's throats. When I hung up, I felt unsettled, doubt creeping in around the edges. Was I doing the right thing taking such a hard line? Should I be more forgiving, amicable, for the sake of co-parenting peacefully? I discussed this with Hale the next day, in the context of settlement. Should I compromise more to avoid dragging it out? He gave measured advice. Amicable is good if you can manage it, but not at the expense of what you truly feel is best for the kids. You have strong leverage, and so far her side seems open to giving you primary custody. If that's your goal, stay the course until it's signed. You can always choose to be more generous later in practice if you two cooperate. But if you give up custody now, it's hard to change later if problems arise. He was right. I thought of Mark. What if she did end up with him after the dust settled? Would I trust them with my kids half the time? The answer was a resounding no. My resolve firmed again, and it was timely, because soon after, things took another turn. I learned from Lauren, we kept discreetly in touch, that Mark was pressuring Jessica to wrap up her divorce and come move in with him. He was desperate after being suspended from work and served by his wife. He probably felt clinging to Jessica was his only win left. Lauren also told me Mark was livid that in our divorce filings, his name was essentially dragged through the mud. Not that he was a party to the case, but the affair was documented. He apparently blamed Jessica for not controlling her husband. The audacity of that made me laugh. This pressure from Mark manifested when Jessica's attorney suddenly pushed for a quick settlement. They wanted to finalize the divorce sooner rather than later, with a proposed agreement that mirrored what we discussed. I keep the house, she gets more cash assets. I have primary custody, but she gets substantial visitation, like 2 evenings a week plus every other weekend, a bit more than the temporary order. And neither pays child support. I declined it, as promised. On the surface, it was a reasonable deal. Many people in my shoes might have signed immediately. After all, I was largely getting what I wanted. But something held me back. Perhaps it was the part of me that still desired some form of justice beyond just getting the kids. The final bow of public humiliation hadn't yet occurred. If I signed now, the divorce could be quiet. Jessica and Mark might even thank their lucky stars that they escaped without public scandal beyond their immediate circles. I realized I wasn't ready to let them off that easily. Yes, I wanted my children safe and my life stable, but damn it, a large part of me also craved to see them answer for what they did. Truly answer in the light of day. All the emotional turmoil I'd suffered demanded closure in the form of consequences for them, and an outright final settlement, done behind closed doors, felt too anticlimactic. So I told Hale to stall just a bit, under the guise of reviewing final details. Jessica, probably eager to finish, called me personally the next day, one of the few direct conversations we had since separation, asking if I was truly okay with the terms. Her tone was almost pleading, as if she were worried I might change my mind and get harsher. I assured her calmly that I just needed to double-check a few legalese points. She seemed relieved and said she hoped we could both move forward soon. I hung up with a plan forming. The decisive blow was near. I had to time it right. After all, legal documents were signed, but before life went on and people forgot the wrongs that had been done. And I knew exactly how to deliver it. With a little help. The weeks that followed were all about careful setup. I signed the settlement agreement with Jessica on a crisp fall morning, about 3 months after I first discovered the affair. In a sterile conference room at my lawyer's office, with our attorneys present, we inked the paperwork that divided our life. I watched Jessica's hand tremble as she signed her name below mine on the final decree document. She looked up at me across the table with an inscrutable expression. Sadness, regret, perhaps a hint of relief. I likely mirrored it. We exchanged polite words. Who would pick up the kids from school that day? A note about transferring some utilities to my name only. Mundane, considering the magnitude of what we'd just executed. And that was that. Our marriage was officially over, pending the judge's formal approval, which was expected as it was uncontested now. Outside the office, the autumn sun was shining, leaves turning golden on the trees lining the street. Jessica walked out with me, our lawyers trailing behind sorting papers. She cleared her throat. So, I guess we'll start telling people. We had kept things mostly quiet. Only close family knew we were separated. The settlement meant we'd have to announce the divorce and new arrangement. Yeah, I said, hands in my pockets. It's time. She took a deep breath. I'll always be sorry, Mike. But I'm also sorry it had to end like this. She gestured weakly with the folder of papers in her hand. I simply nodded. My feelings were too complex to put into words. I didn't trust myself to speak without either saying something cruel or something too forgiving, and I wanted neither at that moment. We parted with a very brief, awkward hug, instinct more than anything, when the lawyers weren't looking. As she turned to go to her car, I said, "Take care of yourself." She looked back, eyes moist, and gave a half smile before walking away. I sat in my car for a few minutes afterward, processing. It was done. I had what I wanted legally. The house was mine. I was the primary custodial parent. And the children's schedule was set in a way that Mark, or any future partner of hers, would have minimal involvement. There would be no alimony exchange, no child support exchange. Each of us responsible for expenses during our own time. Financially, I had given up some assets, but nothing I couldn't recover in time. On paper, I had won. Yet why did I feel so hollow? The emotional weight was immense. In that solitude, I allowed myself a moment to mourn. Not for Jessica per se, but for the death of the life I thought I had. I'd read once that divorce can feel like a death. And in that moment, it did. The death of our marriage, of our intact family unit. I shed a few tears quietly, then wiped my face and steadied myself. Because it wasn't completely over yet. Not in my mind. There was one chapter left to write, the final sequence of public humiliation. I had been meticulous not to burn that opportunity. Up until the ink was dry, I kept my word and the affair details as contained as possible. I hadn't told the kids, or our extended friend circle, or made any public accusations. I even kept my parents in the dark about the infidelity specifics, though they suspected. This restraint paid off. Jessica was likely lulled into a sense that she'd avoided utter disgrace. She'd gotten a reasonably fair settlement. Perhaps she thought I'd decided to take the high road by not dragging her or Mark through the mud publicly. Little did she know, I was merely waiting for a more opportune stage. Through Lauren, I learned that Mark's divorce was not going as smoothly. She was out for blood, and rightfully so. Mark was fighting her on money, especially since he'd lost his job. The company quietly terminated him, citing policy violations, though he got a small severance to avoid legal issues. Lauren was infuriated that he was crying poor to reduce her settlement and child support, so she decided to crank up the heat. She planned to expose him and Jessica as thoroughly as possible, not just for revenge, but to strengthen her leverage. Apparently, in their state, marital misconduct could impact the alimony significantly. She had filed on adultery grounds, and their proceedings were heading to a court hearing. She invited me to that hearing, which was somewhat open to involved parties, especially since I was a witness to part of their affair, having evidence. Initially, I thought to keep my distance, but then a perfect idea formed. Why not coordinate the public humiliation with Lauren's efforts? We could deliver a double whammy, one that reverberated through both our exes' lives in one go. I provided Lauren with copies of the photos and emails I had. She already had some, but I had more. She subpoenaed me as a witness in her case, primarily to authenticate evidence. I agreed readily. This meant I would be testifying in open court about what I knew. That alone would be a spotlight on their affair and a public record. However, I wanted something more theatrical, something they wouldn't forget. I discussed quietly with Lauren and, surprisingly, with Hale too. Though it was outside my own case, he gave me some personal advice on the risks. He cautioned me, be careful. If it looks like a vendetta, it could backfire personally. You have your kids to think of, how they'll view this down the road. It was a fair point, but I reasoned that the kids were too young to know details now, and by the time they'd be old enough to possibly stumble on this, the raw edges would have smoothed. Also, frankly, I felt Mark and Jessica's actions merited a proportional response. Hale understood. Off the record, he admitted he'd seen many people crave that moment of public reckoning. Just keep it lawful, he said with a wink. Absolutely. The plan crystallized. The date, a Friday morning, the day of Mark and Lauren's divorce hearing. The place, the county courthouse. The players, myself, Lauren, a handful of others. I had subtly encouraged a few mutual acquaintances, including a nosy mutual friend who always loved drama, to support me that day, under the guise that I was giving a statement in a case related to my divorce. I knew they'd show up out of curiosity and spread whatever gossip came out. I also knew Jessica wouldn't be able to resist attending Mark's hearing. She was emotionally entwined and likely wanted to support him, or at least see what happened, even if she had to stay in the hallway, as she wasn't a party to it. Sure enough, that morning, I spotted Jessica in the courthouse hallway, sitting on a bench, wringing her hands. Mark was farther down, talking agitatedly with his attorney. Lauren was on the other side with her counsel, looking steeled for battle. She caught my eye and gave a small nod. Showtime. Jessica approached me as I walked by. It was the first time I'd seen her in person since signing the papers. She looked anxious. "Mike, what are you doing here?" she asked quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "I'm a witness for Lauren. I have evidence relevant to her case." I kept my tone neutral, but I saw the alarm in Jessica's eyes. "You're testifying?" Her voice quavered. "Yes. I imagine your friend over there didn't tell you." I glanced pointedly at Mark. He saw me and quickly looked away, shame or anger flushing his face. "Mike, please!" She started, but before she could continue, the courtroom doors opened, and a clerk called us in. I gave Jessica a tight shrug. "I have to go. This is public court. You can sit in if you want." It was a formality. Of course she'd sit and watch. She wouldn't leave Mark to the wolves entirely. Inside the courtroom, it was modestly populated. Aside from the parties and lawyers, I noticed a couple of reporters, likely because it was a juicy divorce with allegations of infidelity involving a local businessman, and a few of those acquaintances I'd tipped off. What ensued was perhaps the most satisfying half hour of my life up to that point. Lauren's attorney laid out the case. Mr. C. Mark had breached marital vows and squandered marital assets in an affair with Mrs. K., my ex-wife, named in full. The judge, a serious man with a stern countenance, listened as they described hotel receipts, gifts, etc. Then I was called to the stand. I took the oath, my heart pounding not from fear but adrenaline. I spotted Jessica in the back row, half hidden behind a pillar, face ashen. Mark was avoiding eye contact with me entirely, focusing on some papers with a scowl. Lauren's lawyer had me identify myself and then asked, "Did you become aware of an extramarital affair between your then-wife Jessica K. and Mr. Mark C.?" "Yes," I replied clearly. I proceeded to recount briefly how I discovered it, confirming the dates, the evidence I found. I authenticated photos I'd taken. They were displayed on a screen for the courtroom, one of which showed a clear image of Jessica and Mark embracing at the B&B entrance. There were audible murmurs in the seats. The scandalous nature was not lost on the audience. I also read out a short excerpt from one of the emails where Jessica and Mark spoke about being together openly soon. It made for a damning narrative of their intentions. During cross-examination, Mark's attorney tried to minimize my testimony. "Mr. K, isn't it true you have personal animosity toward Mr. C given the circumstances?" I answered evenly, "I have animosity toward what he did, yes. He slept with my wife. But the evidence I've provided is factual and speaks for itself." He then asked if I knew anything about Mark being a good father or not to his own kids. I admitted I did not, beyond this incident. It was a weak attempt to paint me as biased, but the damage was done. After my testimony, Lauren's side introduced a surprise: a short audio recording. I didn't know about this beforehand, but apparently Lauren had confronted Mark privately weeks ago and recorded him angrily admitting, "Jess and I didn't mean for you all to find out like this," and cursing both Lauren and me for ruining their lives. The clip was brief but showed his disregard for us. Mark's face went through a series of colors as that played, and I saw Jessica cover her mouth in the back, eyes wide. In his defense, Mark himself took the stand and tried to appear remorseful. He admitted to the affair under direct questioning, calling it a mistake and insisting it was over now. I saw Jessica react to that. Her brow furrowed. Perhaps he hadn't told her he was claiming it was over. He portrayed himself as a loving father who fell into a midlife crisis mistake. It might have been somewhat convincing if Lauren's attorney hadn't then asked, with a razor-sharp tone, "Mr. C, you say it's over. Are you still in communication with Mrs. K?" Mark stammered, "Well, not in a romantic way. We're in touch occasionally." The lawyer pounced. You were seen entering this courthouse together this morning. Did you coordinate with her on your testimonies today? He fumbled. No, she's not involved. She came for support. Wrong thing to say. A ripple went through the audience. Support. So not over at all, it seemed. The judge raised a hand to stop that line, since it was tangential. But the damage to Mark's credibility was done, in my opinion. In the end, the judge ruled from the bench on a few matters, favoring Lauren heavily on asset split and alimony due to marital misconduct. It was a clear rebuke of Mark's actions. He even said, "This court finds Mr. C's behavior egregious. Using marital funds to conduct an affair, and the impact on Mrs. C and the children, is a significant factor in the equitable distribution." Mark stood there looking utterly defeated. Lauren was shaking with what I think was relieved happiness. As for Jessica, I saw her slip out just before the session ended, perhaps unable to face me or the others. Outside the courtroom, it wasn't over yet. Remember that public humiliation needed one final flourish. Several colleagues from Jessica's workplace had gotten wind of the story through the grapevine. The friend I invited had a big mouth. They didn't attend court, but they certainly heard details by the end of the day. I may or may not have also anonymously emailed a couple of the juicier court transcripts to a local blogger who thrived on community drama. By the next week, an article, without full names, thankfully, described a local business manager loses job over affair with employee. Messy divorces ensue. Anyone who knew us could fill in the blanks. The social fallout was significant. Jessica's parents, for instance, who I had not told the full truth to before, now knew. I got an angry call from her father a few days later, who, after confirming the truth, ended up apologizing to me and expressing deep disappointment in his daughter. Her mother was reportedly devastated. They were a close-knit, church-going family. This was a scandal they never imagined. At school, I suspect some parents of our kids' classmates figured it out too. Not that it mattered much, but I did sense a few sympathetic looks cast my way, and perhaps a couple of judgmental ones towards Jessica when she came to a school event later. In our friend circle, once the truth was out, support rallied around me. People I hadn't even told came by with hugs or invitations to dinner, offering "we had no idea" and "you're doing so well for the kids," etc. Jessica likely felt a subtle ostracism. Some of her own friends might have distanced themselves, not wanting to condone her actions. And Mark? He was basically run out of town. With no job and an ex-wife who took a large chunk of his assets, he actually moved 2 states away to live with a cousin, from what I heard. As for his relationship with Jessica, unsurprisingly, it did not survive the pressure cooker of all that exposure and stress. I heard through Lauren, who got it from her kids via their dad, that Mark and Jessica had a massive falling out right after the hearing, each blaming the other for the fiasco. They split, for good. The final act of humiliation I orchestrated was almost petty, but felt apt. I took the evidence and the outcome of their divorces and compiled a neat package which I mailed anonymously to the HR department of the company where Jessica still worked. Now, she hadn't technically violated a policy since she was subordinate, and presumably not the one in power. But I pointed out how her presence had contributed to a major incident that got a manager fired and cost the company face. There was no immediate action I know of, but the implicit smear on her professional record was there. She ended up voluntarily leaving that job a couple months later, perhaps due to discomfort or informal pressure. I didn't particularly revel in that part. By then I was a bit tired of the vengeance track. But I can't say I felt bad. She found another job eventually, I later learned, but not at the same level. One chilly evening after all the dust had settled, I found myself at a local park watching my kids play on the swings. The sky was turning orange and pink with the sunset. My son called, "Dad, watch this!" as he jumped off a swing mid-air and landed on his feet. My daughter giggled and clapped. I cheered and gave them a thumbs up, heart swelling with love. These were the moments I fought for. We had weathered the storm and come through intact on the other side, at least the three of us. I sat on a bench, hands in my jacket pockets, and reflected on everything that had happened. The psychological and strategic journey I undertook still felt a bit surreal. In a matter of months, I had gone from a betrayed, broken man to the single father with full charge of his children's lives, and along the way delivered justice, however cold and calculated, to those who had wronged me. Did it feel as good as I imagined? In truth, delivering that final blow to Jessica and Mark had felt satisfying in the moment. Seeing their lies uncovered and their reputations tarnished was a balm to the deep hurt they caused. It was vindication, plain and public. I won't pretend I didn't sleep easier after that. However, there's no pure victory in such affairs, no pun intended. I also felt a lingering sadness. There were no winners, really. My kids would grow up in a divorced family. As much as I intended to provide them a loving home, I could never fully shield them from the effects of the split. And one day, when they're old enough to understand, they'll learn why it happened. They'll know what their mother did. I wonder how that will color their relationship with her, with me, with the idea of love and trust. I resolved to handle that carefully when the time came. As for Jessica, life had punished her thoroughly. I didn't take joy in her struggling to rebuild. Part of me will always care about her as the mother of my children, and as someone I once deeply loved. I hope she finds some redemption and becomes a better person from this. People can change. I don't know if she will, but for the kids' sake, I hope she at least becomes a reliable mom again in due time. We maintain a civil co-parenting relationship now. She keeps to the agreed schedule, and when she has the kids, I know she tries to make the most of it. She's more attentive with them, probably overcompensating for her guilt. I allow that. Anything that heals their bond is fine by me. I've even managed to let go of much of my anger toward her. Not forgiveness exactly, but a sort of acceptance. She's serving her penance in various ways, and it's not my job to punish her further beyond what I've done. I haven't spoken to Mark since the courtroom day and have no desire to. In my mind, he's a cautionary tale and nothing more. He lost his wife, career, and whatever future he thought he had with Jessica. In a way, his downfall was the most complete. If our story were a morality play, he got the villain's ending he deserved. "Dad, push me higher!" my daughter yelled from the swing set, snapping me out of my thoughts. I walked over and gave her a gentle push, prompting delighted squeals. I smiled genuinely, feeling content. This was my life now, simpler in some ways, more challenging in others, but honest and earned. Every decision I made, every bit of patience, every strategic play, it was all for these moments, ensuring my kids and I could have peace and stability. I thought about a phrase I once heard: "Revenge is a dish best served cold." Indeed, I had served mine cold, methodically, without rash violence or illegal acts, but with precision and patience, and it was effective. But I also learned another truth. Revenge might sate the mind, but it doesn't heal the heart. The heart needs time and purpose. My purpose now is raising my children to be happy, secure people despite the upheaval. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I took my kids home. In the quiet after I put them to bed, I often sit with a book or just my thoughts. Sometimes I relive events and second-guess a move or two, wondering if I went too far or not far enough. But ultimately, I find peace in knowing I fought for what mattered without losing myself completely. In the darkest moments of this journey, I worried I might become as cold and bitter as the betrayal that struck me. But here I am, heart still capable of love, most evident in how I cherish my children. They saved me from falling too far. Jessica's betrayal broke me. Planning and executing revenge perhaps put me back together. But it's the day-by-day act of moving forward, of being a father, that truly made me whole again. In the end, our story will become one of those family sagas the world moves on from. Gossip will fade, new scandals will arise for people to talk about, and we'll be another divorced family doing our best. One day, years from now, I might sit with my ex-wife at a school graduation or a wedding for one of our kids. We'll be cordial, maybe even friendly in a distant way. We'll share pride in our children. And perhaps with the long lens of time, we'll acknowledge the journey we took, hellish as it was, led to them growing up in healthier homes than if the facade had continued. I don't regret what I did. It was the path I needed to take to protect my family and my self-respect. It was not the only path, I recognize that, but it was my path. As I close this chapter of my life, I do so with a clear conscience. I didn't stoop to any illegal or immoral lows. I fought smartly and justly, and I came out the other side not as a bitter man, but as a stronger one. This was my story, the story of a husband wronged, who kept his cool, played the long game, and emerged victorious. The final checkmate delivered, the pieces are back in the box, and life goes on. I'm ready for whatever comes next.